Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. And do we have some good news to talk about? Many of you are already aware of this. Five-star linebacker Zayden Walker committed to Georgia yesterday. That's fun to discuss, but it also perhaps previews another big weekend coming up for Georgia on the visitor front. That's fun to discuss as well. Terrence Edwards stops by, the great former Georgia wide receiver. He's on the program. In light of who has visited Georgia, who will visit Georgia, all of this really fun too. So it is the time to be here. A great, great summer show, basking in another successful moment for Georgia in this wonderful era of UGA recruiting. Walker yesterday, perhaps plenty more to come after that. So what do you say we talk about that and a whole lot more here today? It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. It begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at georgiadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Always a great day when you get to start the show by talking about some really good recruiting news for UGA. And, of course, today that's exactly what we get to do after five-star linebacker Zayden Walker from Sly County committed to Georgia yesterday. Now, for a second here, we're going to kind of do the stuff you sort of expect. And then after that, I want to kind of dive a little deeper into one reason in particular why I think the Walker commitment news should really not go unnoticed. And obviously, we kind of said this before, you know, when you're a program like Georgia and you've won so many big recruiting battles, it's easy to sort of lump them all together. But I think the Walker thing here perhaps kind of flies in the face of an emerging trend for college football that thus far, for the most part, Georgia's not really a participant in. And I think that's really good news. And we're going to get to that here coming up in a moment. First of all, anybody who's down there around Ellaville, Sly County, I'll tell you, Walker is a really good player. Small program like that, you got to kind of wear a lot of hats, and Walker wears them all really well. But at Georgia, he's going to be a linebacker in the mold of linebackers that Georgia currently has, like Raylan Wilson and C.J. Allen. Obviously, Smile Monin's still a part of the program. And the sort of previous era of Butkus Award-winning N'Kobe Dean, Butkus Award-winning Roquan Smith, that Georgia has just set such a high standard at the inside linebacker position. And, you know, the Zayden Walker commitment yesterday is sort of the next generation on that. The numbers are staggering in terms of just how successful Georgia has been at recruiting this position, and obviously taking those prospects that it recruits and signs and then turning them into high-level players. Georgia, when it comes to inside linebackers, has become about as much of a sure thing as college football provides you. And obviously the guy that I think gets a lot of the credit for that is Glenn Schumann. And one of the things that we said yesterday, we kind of popped on video for a couple of minutes, myself and Connor Riley and our DawgNation recruiting insider Jeff Sintel. And the point that comes up is that as Schumann, who was, listen, when he first took the job at Georgia, when Kirby got here in 2016, he'd never been an on-field coach before. This is still a guy who's in his mid-30s, almost early to mid-30s, so a very, very young coach. But as his responsibilities at Georgia have gone up, you know, he was co-defensive coordinator with Will Muschamp. That's, you know, kind of obviously a lot of experience to lean on. Now Muschamp isn't there anymore, so presumably Glenn Schumann taking on even more defensive responsibilities. And yet as Schumann has grown here in his professional responsibilities at Georgia, his recruiting success has not dropped off at all. It's like Justin Williams a year ago. It's Zayden Walker here right now. And you know, we compare that to a guy like Dan Lanning, and you maybe heard us say this on yesterday. And listen, you can't be a bigger fan of Lanning than I am. I think that Lanning's impact on the 2021 defense and that first national championship for Kirby Smart, I don't think Lanning's gotten enough credit for that. I think he was a massive, massive figure on that team. I think his coaching personality, his style, you know, was a huge influence on how Georgia performed, you know, that season. So I think that Lanning's a major, major figure in the Kirby era. But when Lanning did become defensive coordinator at UGA, his position, outside linebacker, some of the recruiting success at Georgia kind of dropped off a little bit there at that point in time. But Schumann, as he's kind of grown as a young coach into a bigger role, you haven't seen any drop-off for him when it comes to inside linebacker. That's just a credit to Glenn Schumann here. And it's also one of those things where Georgia's probably lucky to still have Schumann. a guy that at some point in time we believe is going to be a big-time head coach, traveling a similar path to what Lanning has traveled. But for now, Georgia has him, and Georgia's reaping the benefits of a guy like this who's just about cleaning house at his position as well as anybody could. Obviously, rivaled by Todd Hartley-Well with the tight ends, and you can sort of cite other examples here at Georgia, but you can't really do better than what Glenn Schumann has done. That's how good that he's been. And, of course, we've kind of talked about all of that, and all of that deserves to be discussed over and over again. But I want to dive a little deeper here just for a moment about specifically why I think the Walker commitment yesterday was sort of especially impressive for Georgia. And I don't think that Georgia, during this 2025 cycle, I don't think Georgia has gotten enough credit for how it's recruited a guy like Walker here thus far. Up until yesterday, when Walker announced for Georgia coming off his official visit to UGA this past weekend, the expectation was there were going to be at least 2 more official visits for Zayden Walker. He was going to go to Miami, and he was going to go to South Carolina. He was going to visit there. And I guess you'd say the kind of consensus within the recruiting industry was, Georgia was fighting with Miami and South Carolina for Walker's services. And so beating out Miami right now, everybody understands what that is because Miami is probably the program that's been the most outspoken about the money they're willing to spend on NIL, being more specific about it than some other programs have. And in some cases, when it comes to transfers, things like that, it's sort of easier to notice just exactly kind of where it's spending its money and how aggressive it wants to be. So when you beat Miami for a recruit right now, you sort of think, okay, well, that's an example of Georgia kind of going to war against one of the bigger NIL programs and still finding a way to win. So the storyline on that kind of writes itself, and maybe that foreshadows future success with a guy like Elias Williams or something like that. We'll have to wait and find out. But beating Miami here sort of is easy to understand. That makes a lot of sense. But I'll also tell you this. Even though they, I think, have gotten less attention at times from some Georgia fans, in a way, I kind of took South Carolina seriously in this recruitment. There's a family tie there for Walker to the Gamecocks program. And a program like South Carolina trying to win with a guy like Walker, this is one of those things that in kind of the bigger picture world of college football, we've just seen a lot more of this as of late. And this is going to come across like conspiratorial. I don't mean for it to, but like one of the things that some people I think were excited about with the advent of NIL was it was a chance to kind of artificially level the playing field for college football overall. It is just a fact that in a competitive environment, they're going to be divergent interests. And obviously Georgia wants to hoard as many good players as it can and as much success as it can. It wants to kind of keep all that for itself. But if you're not Georgia, well, of course, you don't want Georgia winning all the time. You don't want Georgia winning on the national championships. You don't want Georgia winning with all the elite players. And so I think there was a hope that, okay, well, now that there's NIL, maybe this is going to create an atmosphere where players don't all go to the same place anymore, whether it be Georgia or Alabama or Ohio State or wherever else. Maybe now players will kind of spread themselves out a little bit more. And when you look at the 2024 recruiting class, just as a for instance on this, you see an example of, yeah, you know what, that kind of is true, that you see more of that. In fact, let me show you this on the screen here for a moment. Let's just kind of run through the top players according to the 24/7 Sports composite from a year ago. Jeremiah Smith, Ohio State. Ellis Robinson, Georgia. Lagway and McCray both go to Florida. Cam Coleman goes to Auburn. Williams-Winery, that's a guy that Georgia wanted, but somewhat weirdly, at least in the eyes of some, ended up going to Missouri. You look at Raiola. That's another guy Georgia wanted, but kind of weirdly sort of a one-off style recruitment. He goes to Nebraska. You know, Ryan Williams, he went to Alabama. Jordan Ross went to Tennessee. Justin Williams, Georgia did get 2 of the top 10 a year ago, but number 11 player Justin Scott goes to Miami. Jalen McBakwe, he ends up going to Alabama, so they're getting their fair share. But when then you look again, you know, Jordan Seaton, the sort of lone elite recruit that goes to Colorado a year ago. Sammy Brown kind of becomes the lone player in the sort of top sort of 15, 20-ish world that goes to Clemson. Terry Bussey does go to Texas A&M. That was one of those February decisions. David Stone goes to Oklahoma. Dominic McKinley, he goes to LSU. The point is that if you look at the overall recruiting last year, you see elite recruits more spread out than you're used to seeing. I'll give you a couple of numbers here. Of the top 13 players in last year's 24/7 Sports composite player rating, the top 13 players went to 10 different schools. That's very unusual compared to what the previous years had been, where a small number of programs were getting a lot of the elite players. Last year, more spread out. 13 players, 10 different schools. Of the top 19 players in America last year, they went to 15 different schools. So of the top elite recruits in America, they were choosing to sort of spread themselves out more last year than you would have perhaps seen in the past. It's sort of assumed that the ability of schools to kind of put a big NIL deal together for that lone recruit they have a chance with, that's sort of part of the explanation for that. So I had kind of wondered, with South Carolina trying to make a big push for Zayden Walker, knowing they'd signed his kind of brother a year ago, would they be this year's version of Williams Winery going to Missouri or Dylan Raiola going to Nebraska, one of those players that Georgia wanted who ended up sort of making sort of a weird kind of one-off style decision? But no, that never materialized. Ultimately, Georgia very consistently, very diligently continue to recruit Zayden Walker over and over again. And even though we're seeing elite five-star level players spread themselves out more than we've seen in the past, ultimately Georgia was still able to win with Zayden Walker, and I think that's a really big deal. It's a credit to Glenn Schumann. It's a credit to Kirby Smart. It's a credit to the Georgia program overall. And obviously Zayden Walker is going to be a player that I believe that Georgia fans are going to be very excited to have here in this program. And the other thing that comes up here is, and I got a great email about this where, like, a Georgia fan, I don't have it to read right in front of me right now, but I would give the guy credit. I'm sorry. But, he was saying something to the effect of, hey, we're the commits for Georgia right now. Program not rated as high as it's been in the past. You're hearing this stuff, but where's the commits? And then he actually emailed again yesterday. Okay, now I trust Kirby again. Everything's good. The Zayden Walker commit sort of proves that's all fine and good and everything's exactly the way it's supposed to be. But I understand where fans come from on that, because you hear these whispers, and I'll come on the air and say, hey, I'm hearing good things about whatever, but there is still that kind of tangible evidence that still has incredible value here. And you hear, oh, man, Georgia had all these official visitors. It went really well. But what specifically does that mean? Some fans would be fair to ask that question. Well, when a guy like Walker commits, well, now you have a little bit more of kind of tangible proof of just how successful last weekend was for Georgia, and perhaps also foreshadowing what Georgia's going to be able to do again this weekend as well, where once again you're talking about a bunch of elite recruits coming in for their official visits, in some cases maybe a couple of high-profile unofficial visitors as well, but a lot of official visitors who are going to use what they learn about Georgia this weekend to make decisions perhaps very similar to the one that Zayden Walker made yesterday. And with that in mind, I thought last night on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger, Jeff Sentell sort of set the stage for that pretty well. Georgia's already gotten a commitment from a five-star linebacker this week, but maybe all of that leads into this weekend for a couple of names in particular where Georgia has a chance to make another big impact on this 2025 class. This is how Jeff said that last night.
Most would say if Georgia can land David Sanders Jr. and C.J. Wiley out of this official visit weekend, no matter what else happens, Christian Garrett, great player, Dontrell Glover, great player, but if you get those two names to commit to the G or to eventually commit to the G out of this weekend, then that would be a smashing success for the Dogs on this official visit weekend.
Do you like the idea of a smashing success for UGA recruiting? Obviously, Georgia fans have come to expect it, and the early evidence we see here right now is the 2025 class maybe no different than any of the previous classes for Georgia have been, and maybe even uniquely impressive in terms of what they could do in-state, right? That's what Walker sort of perhaps is. Now, David Sanders not an in-state recruit, but that's a battle that Georgia seems to have a never-say-die attitude in after a strong push from Ohio State and a strong push from Tennessee. Maybe kind of elbowing Clemson out of the way here, but Georgia does not appear to want to be elbowed out of the way. It appears to want to fight this one all the way to the end. That's great, and fun to hear Jeff mentioning Sanders by name, C.J. Wiley as well. The wide receiver, we'll talk to Terrence Edwards more about him in a moment, coming off the Travis Smith official visit from last week. The point is, we were talking about June being a very big deal for UGA recruiting and being a lot of fun for Georgia fans who wanted to watch and follow it all. Thus far, it has been as advertised. Big weekend for visitors last weekend produces a five-star commit. Momentum being established for another crop of elite visitors here this weekend. It certainly seems like that's probably the case here for UGA. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Thorpe. And we're happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us. Video across all platforms, 10 a.m., radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcast, wherever you find them. Just so happy to have you with us. And in particular, for those of you who listen to us on the podcast, whether it be the Apple Podcast Player, the Spotify Podcast Player, thank you so much. The audio version of this show is how it all began for us. And in particular, if you're a listener on Apple, if you would do me the favor of maybe go back and give us a review, right? If you've never done that, I guess somehow, some way, the big tech people, they use the reviews to share the show with other people or whatever else, especially if you like the show. If you don't like the show, email me personally. If you do like the show, then tell the rest of the world. And we'll put that out there on Apple, and we'll see if we can get a few more folks there on that. The big tech. One of the things I've never been all that good at is just sort of asking for things. We try to do the show. Our hope has always been, well, if you do a good show, people will find it. And for the most part, that's been true now, going on many, many years. But every now and then, maybe it's good to sort of ask, for a little something. So if you would not mind going to Apple, giving us a podcast review, I would certainly appreciate that. And subscribe over there if you've never done that either. Spotify, Apple, wherever else. Hey, big thanks to our friends at Merriweather and Thorpe, make the show possible. Your source for Georgia divorce. Now, this is one of those deals where we've been saying that about Merriweather and Thorpe for a long time. But in the last, year or so, it's amazing the growth of this organization. And obviously, I am very proud of that because of the relationship we've had with Merriweather and Thorpe, but also because of my understanding of what our friends at Merriweather and Thorpe do on a regular basis. Look, divorce, which is what they've dedicated their life to learning as much about as possible, is just a tough business, right? Many of you can tell your own personal story about that. Perhaps you have anxiety because you feel like that's maybe going to be a part of your story at some point in time in the future. I don't make a lot of that. I don't make jokes about that. We obviously take that very, very seriously. But at the same time, I don't hesitate to talk about it either. Because if that's your reality, then the only thing in your life that makes any sense is confronting reality as the cards have been dealt to you. Which means if you've got to go through a divorce, if you don't have another option, if you recognize this as just an obvious next step for you, then the obvious next choice for you is to partner with an advocate who can help you get through this and create a more positive set of circumstances on the other side of all of this for you. And the good news is the same level of service that our friends at Merriweather and Thorpe have been providing to folks in the Atlanta area for a great number of years, now they're providing it to folks all across the state of Georgia. I'm talking about in Savannah or in Carrollton or in Athens. I think it's coming soon in Peachtree City. They've got locations opening up all across the state because they want to provide to all Georgians what they've been providing here in the Atlanta area for a long time. So the website to go to is GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. That's right. Merriweather and Thorpe is your source for Georgia divorce. Please find them online. GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. All right, we've got Terrence Edwards here coming up in just a moment. But prior to our conversation with Terrence, I want to set that up by going around the doghouse. And one of Terrence's proteges, the terrific four-star wide receiver Travis Smith, was a part of what we mentioned a moment ago, a really seemingly enjoyable and successful official visit weekend for Georgia this past weekend. And great job by Jeff Sentell last night. You heard from Jeff a moment ago. But on Jeff's show, before the Hedges were presented by Kroger, Jeff also had an interview last night with Travis Smith, his high school teammate Juan Gaston. But I want to focus on Smith here for a moment about how the official visit went, because a lot of folks know, as we said before, Georgia's trying to break through and really kind of win with some in-state wide receivers here in the class of 2025, the class of 2026. Travis Smith is obviously a big name to know there in that regard. So fresh off his official visit, he was talking to DawgNation yesterday. This is a little bit about what Travis Smith had to say about all of that.
Definitely did. The amount of fun I had with my whole entire family, not just my parents, it was great. Having my grandparents there, my actual parents, my sisters there, it was nothing but a blast. So I really appreciate UGA for having me. I could see it through their faces, they're always supportive, they always tell me no matter where you go, we're gonna support you. So they don't really directly tell me, but I could see through their face. They were like, this feels like home. I was like, hey man, Kirby, let's get us a little walk in. we tried to be groovy with it.
So you asked him to, huh?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Where did the red glasses come from? Did you tell him to wear those?
I didn't. I just got some. He was looking for some, and then one of the guys ended up handing them to him. So, yeah, it was a good moment. Yeah, Coley, he's interesting. I love me some Coach Coley, man. He's always been a cool dude. And my parents, out of any coach, they're always speaking high on him because, just the way he speaks with us, it's everlasting. Always has good stuff to say. And it seems like on any topic we get on, he knows what he's talking about. It's absolutely crazy. He's very intelligent.
So I think a lot of really good stuff there from Travis Smith, both in terms of having fun in the official visit, liking the relationship with James Coley. All of that's really good. And if you're watching on video, you see the kind of the runway walk they were doing, kind of down the aisle. Travis Smith, he's got the shades on, he's looking good, and Kirby Smart's got the sport coat on, the shades on there as well. Now listen, this is one of those things that Kirby has kind of always done on these visits. He's always had fun and been kind of loose with these recruits. You want a coach, I think, that's able to do that, and Kirby Smart does that really well. He's not doing that kind of thing in any other environment for the most part because that's what this environment sort of calls for, and Kirby kind of does that well. There's also the sense in which, and if you're not watching a video, I apologize, you can't see this, but doesn't Kirby look like the heel wrestling manager from like the 80s or the 90s? Like when Travis Smith looks like the wrestler, Kirby Smart looks like Paul Heyman or somebody like that walking him down the aisle. There's something about that just gives off that vibe for me with the shades on, the sport coat on, very wrestling manager, heel manager-ish right there. I think that's really good. And some really fun stuff from Georgia, who obviously made kind of a big deal with the photo shoots and things like that, made sure the guys who were taking official visits had as much fun as they could possibly have. We'll talk to Terrence Edwards more about that there in a moment. Before we do, let me also squeeze in a quick shout-out here to one of our newest sponsors, and we're so happy to have them a part of the program. I'm talking about Georgia Safe Retirement Planners. And I love having them with us because of one word in particular they have in their name, which is the word safe. Because as you sort of think about kind of some next steps for you that will eventually lead towards retirement, the money you need to make your retirement as enjoyable as it can possibly be and as stress-free as it can possibly be. Well, obviously the work that you do now in terms of the decisions you make, that sets you up for that great future. And that's what our friends at Georgia Safe Retirement Planners understand all about. And they want to give you a truly free, no-obligation retirement planning service conversation that sort of sets you up for the decision you need to make, all the different things as it relates to your money you need to consider. There's no upfront risk to you on any of this kind of stuff. It's just a chance to get the peace of mind you deserve knowing that financial security for you is possible. So I want you to find them online. It's Georgia, that's the word Georgia spelled out, GeorgiaSafeRetirementPlanners.com. One more time, GeorgiaSafeRetirementPlanners.com. You can get a free, no-obligation consultation, and you should, to make your retirement as good as it can possibly be once you get to that point in your life. All right, so a lot of recruiting stuff today. We're having a good time on all of that. We just saw some cool stuff from Travis Smith. Nobody knows Travis better than our buddy Terrence Edwards. So let's talk to him right now today here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather & Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Just saw some fun video of Travis Smith, and Travis, of course, a guy that's been trained by our friend Terrence Edwards for quite some time. Terrence, how much fun is that for you to see there, if you did get a chance to see it? Kirby's got the shades on. He's got the sport coat, a little bit of a Ric Flair, walk that aisle type of, mindset there on that. It's fun for us to see that because we don't see that kind of stuff unless it's shared on video, at least for the most part. But it's just kind of a window into the fact that Georgia seems really good at making these official visits as enjoyable as they can possibly be.
Oh, most definitely. I think, just watching Trav being able to be himself along with, with Kirby. And I think if people really know Kirby, Kirby is really a Jekyll and Hyde type person. We all know he's that fiery coach that's on the field who's going to get the best out of you. But he also is a player's coach that the players really understand him, and he understands the player because he was a player not too long ago. So he understands both sides. So you get to see the fun-loving Kirby, and then you get to see Kirby Smart, the football coach. So there's two different people, and Travis seems like he was having a good time.
Yeah, I think the thing that I judge on this, Terrence, is that for someone like Kirby, he's had great success. He sort of lives in a kind of a rarefied world that I certainly can't understand. Obviously, a very, very different tax bracket. And yet he seems to still sort of be a dude. You know what I'm saying? Like, he seems to kind of know how to, like, sort of yuck it up with guys and, kind of he doesn't take himself too seriously. Like, there are some people that wouldn't want sunglass photos. Yeah, I'm a little bit stiff about some of that kind of stuff sometimes. But even though Kirby has all the money in the world, all the success in the world, he still in these moments sort of comes across, as you said, a guy that really all that long ago was kind of a player himself. I think it's cool that Kirby's able to kind of be the businessman, leader of the organization when he needs to be, but also be kind of one of the guys, I guess, a little bit when he needs to be there as well. I sort of want a coach that can wear both those hats, and the best that I can tell, Kirby seems to do that pretty well.
Oh, most definitely. If you see and talk to Kirby outside of Kirby Smart, the coach, he is that funny, goofy, just fun-loving coach that you see when you see these players doing these official visits. And I had a conversation the other day, and I'm gonna bring his wife along in this. Like, Mary Beth is so down to earth. You just wouldn't know that, like you said, that Kirby's making $13 million next year, and that family is not like that at all. Even Kirby's father, like, there's some most down to earth people you would meet, but then there's Kirby, the football coach, who is going to push you to the limits to get the best out of you because he's done it. He understands what work is. But off the field, Kirby is just another guy that's a former football player that's fun and loving, a little goofy and a little funny at times, and he's just one of the guys.
Yeah, I think it's a good point because, obviously we don't talk about Mary Beth a ton here, but, when you think about, because we hear these stories from parents from time to time, there's the breakfast before everybody goes home, or like the karaoke party that sometimes takes place in the basement, or whatever kind of thing that goes on there, is that the kind of entertainment for the parents ends up being a pretty big part of this. And if your wife, the first lady of Georgia football, if she's not fully bought into that part of this, having a bunch of people over for breakfast or having a bunch of people kind of staying at the house late at night, taking care of the parents and all of this, if she's not all on board for that, there are probably a few players over the course of the years, and I can think of a couple in particular, that, those some in-home moments where those families got to go to the sort of the Kirby Smart house, where that ended up being the kind of the final thing that made them say, you know what, maybe this is a place that can feel like home for our son. She probably ought to get more credit for some of the recruiting success that she probably has gotten, maybe because she sort of stays out of the spotlight. But I've certainly been told plenty of times that she's made parents feel very, very secure about sending their sons to UGA.
Right, and she has a unique perspective because, Mary Beth was a UGA women's basketball player, so she was a scholarship player, so she understands, and she went through the recruiting process as well. So both of those parents, Kirby Smart and Mary Beth, understands the recruiting process because both of those were former athletes. So, you have to give, the wives some credit in this because, now as me being the head coach and now my wife has to, be kind of the first lady of Mount Vernon. So she's an athlete as well. So they have to understand a lot of things that we have to go through just being on the phone a lot. And I know, my situation is not even close to what Coach Smart has to go through. So, you got to have a significant other there that really understands because now you're going to have a broken home and they are tight-knit as they can come. And I love both of those, the Smart family. So, and Mary Beth and I was there the whole time. So we have a unique bond.
Nice.
Every time we see each other. It's just all love. So, yeah, she has to be on board with all this, and she has to also help. And I like that she plays a part in all of this.
No, I love that. That's awesome to hear. Let me do one more thing on this topic before we talk about something else. Whether it be Travis last week or CJ Wiley, who's coming in this week, beyond the photo shoot and beyond that kind of thing, what are these guys looking for in a week like this? We just heard Travis Smith a moment ago talk about the relationship that he's forming right now with James Coley and the fact that he's impressed with Coley's knowledge about a number of subjects. Obviously Travis and CJ are different guys, so perhaps they have slightly different, things they're interested in. But beyond the glitz and glamour of an official visit, what do players want, and what do the families of these players want from a moment like this?
I think, like Travis said, I think this is applicable to everyone, is now when you could bring grandmother and little sister and the whole family there, and they could get, if you could if everyone in that family could get the same vibe, then you understand like this may be a place for me. When the whole family is in rocks, they're like, man, this feels like home. So now Travis and CJ and the rest of the recruits now have to go back and just sit down and like, my family enjoyed this. My family would love coming up every Saturday, watching me play here. So it also, I know it's going to be those guys' decision, but it also goes into play that my family enjoyed the atmosphere, how my family was treated on this visit. So those things go a long way that a lot of people don't see. But Travis said it. His grandfather, grandmother, his sisters, they enjoyed the visit just as much as he did, and they felt like it was home. So that's going to go a long way.
How about Zayden Walker's commitment to Georgia? Terrence, I'm blown away by the fact that I guess Georgia's just going to get the best inside linebacker in America like every single year. It's just amazing the level of consistency, whether it's Justin Williams a year ago or Walker right now, or guys like C.J. Allen, Raylan Wilson, and Troy Bowles got a big future at Georgia, perhaps coming up too. They just win with this kind of guy seemingly every year. I mean, think about Nakobe and Roquan and guys like that. This is also a big part of the overall success formula for UGA there as well. And it continues yesterday with Walker. What did you think about that commitment?
That's a big-time pickup. I've watched him a lot. He's a guy that I think is probably going to be an outside linebacker. That's just what I see. He could play inside, but kind of similar to Jalen Walker.
Yeah.
He has the pass rushing ability. He's very physical at the point of attack. He can set the edge because he has the strength and the knowledge to set the edge. So I think this is a phenomenal pickup from an in-state guy. But just picking up outside linebackers or linebackers, period, once a linebacker walks into that facility and Coach Schumann can just show him all the players that have came through Georgia in the last 10 years and show what they've been able to do on the field, off the field. And now these guys are getting drafted. I mean, just put on the tape of Roquan, Nakobe, all those guys have been first-team All-Americans, first-team All-SEC, and every kid's dream is to play in the NFL. And if you come to Georgia and you produce and you the player that you think you are, Coach Schumann is going to develop you to a probably an NFL player.
Yeah, I've heard the comparison to Jalen Walker because of the fact that, among a lot of things, Zayden Walker's already, a sort of an accomplished pass rusher in his own right here. And I think it's fun to consider a guy who has the kind of, beef, if you will, to kind of play that inside linebacker spot, but also the speed to sort of step out and get after quarterbacks when you need to. The other thing, Terrence, is you go back and look at 2021, one of the things that Georgia did with the best defense that most of us have ever seen, one of the things they would do really well is they'd send the inside linebacker on the blitz, right? Like that ended up being one of the ways that Georgia got after quarterbacks that year was sending, I guess every inside linebacker is going to be a Walker, but Quay Walker that year or Nakobe Dean that year, sending them after the quarterback. There's also a way that Georgia has shown the ability to get after quarterbacks from the inside linebacker position. And when Georgia's been at its best, pointing those guys like missiles towards the quarterback, that's been a part of the formula.
Oh, most definitely. I think if you have a guy that has the ability to work inside and outside, and now you be able to blitz in the A gap and B gap, that goes a long way now, freeing up pass rushers on the outside now because you won't be able to double the outside pass rushers because you don't want to leave a guard or a center one-on-one with a guy like Nakobe Dean or Roquan Smith with that type of ability, and they get a running start. So, you're just getting guys that are athletic and guys that can run. And I think that's the formula of what Kirby Smart and company is looking for, guys that are big and who can run and very physical.
So
love ball, as he would say,
which maybe is as important as anything. I think you're right about that. I want to move on to this topic because I asked this to Jake Fromm the other day from the perspective of a quarterback, and I want to ask you from the perspective of wide receiver. Kirby at spring meetings in Destin, Florida last week was asked about Carson Beck, and he kind of challenged him with the idea of, okay, now you're moving into your second year as a starter. You know the offense, but step up and be more vocal and maybe perhaps be more vocal with your wide receivers there too. And we talked to Jake the other day about some of the offseason stuff that quarterback wide receivers do together as a way of kind of developing the chemistry that allows a quarterback to think that he can step up and speak more loudly. But as a receiver yourself, what do you want to hear from your quarterback? If a quarterback is supposed to be a vocal leader, what do you want to hear him say?
It's not what I want him to say. I want to see the command that he has over, especially the offense and the team. The guys that have been very successful. Just think of Stetson. Stetson had the command of that team. Those guys would run for a brick wall for Stetson. And I think that's the next step that Carson takes this year, because he has the physical ability. He's big, he's strong, he's mobile. He can make all the throws. Now I just want him to take command of this team like Stetson did, especially Stetson last year. We all want to put that the defensive team in 21 led us, but in 22, Stetson had the pulse of that team, and that's what I want to see. Carson has the pulse of this team.
It's one of those things where the level of confidence that a guy has in any situation, you can just sort of notice it, right? There's a body language there, there's a demeanor there, and receivers, I'm assuming all positions do, but receivers in particular, because they're so dependent on their quarterback, they want to experience that level of confidence because that gives them a chance to sort of borrow that confidence in tough situations. Is that right?
Oh, most definitely. You got to look for that position to exude the confidence. And I think when you have a guy back there that the guys no doubt believes if we're down a touchdown or down 3 points and we need a field goal to tie or touchdown to win the game, you have that guy at the quarterback position, that we are never out of it. And I think the guys believe in Carson Beck. I believe in Carson Beck. You just think about it. The guy haven't started a game till this year. It was like 4 years. So now coming to his second year as a full-time starter in college football, he's going to take the next step, and it's not necessarily on the field. Just think having command of this team and understanding and believing in himself that he's the best player on the field every time he's on the field.
All right, before we let you go, I was gone last week, but I saw that our buddy DJ Shockley did a nice profile of you for their program there on Channel 5 as you begin your first year as a Mount Vernon head coach. Nice to see you program getting some media attention. People seem to be really happy about what's going on there for Mount Vernon. How fun has all of that been? I guess presumably on the other side of spring practice here and kind of rolling into some 7-on stuff and things like that. How much fun are y'all having this summer right now?
We also had great participation, 40+ kids every day, and I think right now 58 on the roster. So we got dual sport kids that's out playing lacrosse and baseball, and I count those guys present. I'm a dual sport coach, so the guys out playing lacrosse or baseball, they're doing something athletically that I count as present as football. And I want to say this. I saw this the other day, Jeff, is speaking of Mount Vernon being a single-A private football team. Go look at the top players in the state of Georgia right now and see what classification that they come from.
Yeah. No doubt about it.
And it's going to be single-A football. It's going to be single football.
Yeah, Georgia's hoping to sign a 4-star defensive lineman out of the single-A classification, at least for this upcoming year. So Elijah Griffin's a player at Savannah Christian. Yeah, listen, small classification high school football in Georgia is going to include plenty of 4- and 5-star names. There's no doubt about that.
You got Justin Terry from Manchester.
Yep, that's right.
That's single-A football.
That's right.
5-star. You got Savannah Christian down, single-A football. You got my guy up at Fellowship, the offensive lineman, who's the 5-star, single-A football.
That's a great point.
The Walker kid now is down in
Sly
Shelby
County.
right now.
Yeah.
Is that single-A football? So it's single-A football. So some of the top players is in single-A football. So I tell parents all the time, man, that you don't have to go to the 7A, 6A, 5A school. If you're talented enough and you're developed by the coaches, then you will get found. So everyone don't have to load up on the big schools to go play at these major college leagues. If you could play, you can play.
Terrence, great stuff. We appreciate that. Remind folks one more time about the Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy before we say goodbye to you.
Yes, it's not going very much right now, but if you're looking for your son to continue to develop as a wide receiver, you can find me on all social media platforms at Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy.
Appreciate your time, Terrence. Great stuff. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
A little bit of a signal thing for the Terrence there at the end, but he's absolutely right. First of all, it's just like, you look at like what makes Georgia from a high school football standpoint, all the names he rattled off from Savannah Christian, and Sly County and, Manchester. Like, there are some major talents at that sort of lower classification. When you start, kind of rattling off the names, you realize, gosh, how true that really is for this upcoming year and every year here in the state of Georgia. Really good stuff from Terrence Edwards on all of that. We're going to get ready to go cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And, boy, I tell you what, one of the things that we're doing behind the scenes here right now is, and I think we're going to have something good for you here pretty soon, conversations already beginning about a big announcement perhaps as it relates to DawgNation and Royal Caribbean, and this one could be bigger than any we've ever made before in this particular space for a couple of different reasons. I am not supposed to say anything about that because nothing is official and everything is kind of up for grabs. And there's still some options and some, I's to be dotted and some T's to be crossed. We can have some fun stuff coming up on that here very, very soon. But just know this, is that one of the biggest things that Royal Caribbean's got going on for you right now is the soon-to-be debut of Utopia of the Seas. And obviously, anytime a new ship comes on board, that's always a really fun thing. But it's the new stuff that Royal Caribbean has done that I think is amazing. And, a couple different ways you can go about this. You can talk to Jessica Slater about this individually. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her at jslater@dreamvacations.com. But I think this is one of those deals, if you've never cruised before, or if perhaps you haven't cruised in a while, exploring all of the ways in which Royal Caribbean is kind of pushing the envelope in the sort of fun and entertainment category in these new ships, just an incredible thing to consider, whether it be the Broadway-style shows oftentimes that are on board these ships or the brand-new restaurant concepts that are here there as well, the aqua theater on the back of the ship. Remember, I think the one thing that Royal Caribbean wants to be known for is when you're on board, providing more fun entertainment options for you than any other player in the space here. And the high diving show or the Broadway-style show, things like that are one of the ways that they're able to do that. Live music all over the place. One of my favorite things to do when we're on a ship is, after dinner, you kind of roll around and you kind of go from one bar, pub to the next. You hear different styles of live music being played all over the place. That's the kind of experience on land my wife and I don't always get to have, at least this stage of our life. But on a ship like Utopia of the Seas, you better believe that's a huge part of it all. So, as I said before, give Jessica Slater a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. I'm looking forward to being on Utopia of the Seas in July, and I can't wait to come back and tell all of you about it. All right, a couple of stories here I want to hit just for a moment. So Steve Sarkisian had an interesting quote. On3 shared it. It's been kind of picked up a couple of different places there as well. And Sarkisian was talking about moving to the SEC, and he said something I thought was kind of interesting. He said, so when they exposed to me that we were going to the SEC, and they said, okay, what needs to change for us? Meaning his leadership telling him what needs to change for us as we go to the SEC. Sarkisian says, I said we don't have to change anything because that's what we've already been building for anyway. Now, some people are going to say, well, maybe that comes across as a little too much hubris from Sarkisian, that maybe he doesn't know what he's going to get himself into. But there is an element here of, I have been more impressed with Sarkisian and more impressed with Texas over the course of the last year than I perhaps had ever been before. Texas before Sarkisian or Sarkisian before Texas. This is a team that I thought took some real strides a year ago. And I think one of the things that Georgia fans will notice in particular as Georgia gets ready to play Texas here this year is Texas is a little bit different than some of the other teams that are competing for the playoff and competing for the championship. One of the things we point out a lot is that even compared to, like, say, Ohio State, who, you'll see Georgia, Ohio State 1-2 in almost all these preseason rankings. But even for a team like Ohio State, which legitimately could win the national championship this year, Georgia's just got so much more offensive line depth than a program like Ohio State is at. We've talked about that plenty. Even Buckeye fans themselves will say, yeah, we've had a little bit of an issue when it comes to the offensive line. They'll be more than happy to admit that because that's the kind of thing they're talking about all the time. That even among elite national championship contending teams, a lot of those teams just don't have enough linemen. But Texas, not maybe to the same level that Georgia has, but to certainly a pretty impressive level, they've kind of cultivated some offensive line depth. They were very good on the defensive line a year ago. Now, I think it remains to be seen how much they'll kind of follow up on that here in 2024. That's certainly fair. But when Sarkisian says, yeah, we've already been working to be in the SEC or be like an SEC team even before we got here, there's an element to which I sort of take that pretty seriously. Now, listen, Sarkisian still got a lot to prove, and Texas as a program still has a lot to prove, and the whole idea of Texas is back and that meme, I realize that dies hard for a lot of people, and I'm not even saying that it shouldn't. I think your skepticism may be well-founded. But when you think about Texas's chances for success in the SEC, being totally honest, I have to tell you, I think they're probably greater than at one point in time I would have thought they would have been, just simply on the basis of the work they've done to populate their lines of scrimmage. Offensive and defensive linemen, they've just brought in more of that talent, and that's one of the reasons why I believe they may be a little bit more ready for the SEC. Speaking of the SEC, thought that Will Backus had an interesting piece at CBSSports.com the other day looking at transfers ready to make an impact in the league. It was interesting that the only Georgia name that made the list, even though Georgia probably brought in more transfers this year we're kind of used to seeing, the only Georgia name that made the list was Colby Young, and Young wasn't mentioned all that prominently. But I do believe that transfers are going to play a role for Georgia here this year. They've certainly made the wide receiver room deeper than it otherwise would have been. When you kind of scroll through here, I mean, a couple of the names that mentioned, like Walter Nolan at Ole Miss is one of the names that comes up, obviously coming over from Texas A&M. Last year, speaking of teams that probably impressed, what Ole Miss did, they got blown out by Georgia, of course. Going 10-2 a year ago, that was a real accomplishment. And in a 12-team playoff world, that would have been good enough last year to get them into the 12-team playoff, and they obviously want to replicate that here this year. Well, one of the best ways to do that is to be as good as you can possibly be along your defensive line. And so, you're going to see during this offseason a lot of people are sort of taking Ole Miss seriously. And one of the reasons why is bringing in a defensive lineman of the caliber of Walter Nolan. That is a pretty big deal. Now, the thing we've said before is, okay, well, there's a natural level of attrition that happens for every team over the course of a season. And all the good receivers, or I should say all the good transfers that Ole Miss has brought in, what happens when there's a little bit of injury? What happens when there's a little bit of just sort of a natural attrition? Does it hold together after that? Maybe that's a fair question, but it's also fair to say if you assume the sort of better high-end projection, if you assume the best for Ole Miss here right now, clearly they're going to have a defensive line, the likes of which we're not really used to seeing Ole Miss have in kind of a non-Kimdichie era. Another transfer that got some love here was Isaiah Bond. We talked a moment ago about lines of scrimmage for Texas, but bringing in a guy like Bond from Alabama on the heels of losing an A.D. Mitchell and the other receivers that Texas lost, once again, that's probably a pretty big deal. As I mentioned before, Colby Young got a little love on this list. Brock Vandagriff gets a little love on this list too. I think the thing I would say about Vandagriff for a moment is that I think I know what Vandagriff could have been in a Liam Cohen offense, and perhaps Vandagriff knew that Cohen wasn't going to be there when he made the decision to transfer there. I feel like I know what Vandagriff could have been in a Cohen offense and kind of a non-Liam Cohen situation for Kentucky. If that's what it was in 2022, that's not very good. So, I do believe that Vandagriff has a chance to be at least an upper half quarterback in the SEC of the 16 quarterbacks they'll start in this league. I think that, Vandagriff could at least be above the 50th percentile in that because I think he's a pretty good talent. But I don't think the offense is likely to hum as well in Lexington as it would have been if Liam Cohen had remained there as offensive coordinator. So maybe we'll see there on that. And then one more transfer to mention here a moment. So Kadyn Proctor, you're familiar with his story. So Proctor recently spoke out with the media. That's a guy that had been in Alabama, transferred to Iowa after what we're led to believe was a spring break trip with some of his former Alabama teammates, decided to transfer back to Alabama. I think as it stands right now, it's probably the biggest offseason win for Kalen DeBoer in his first year as Alabama coach. And Proctor recently revealed that he actually came back to Alabama for less NIL money than he would have gotten had he gone to Iowa. Now, look, I'm always a little bit skeptical about what any player says about NIL because, and I think this is kind of unfair, but I think that players are afraid to speak about NIL. Like, how many stories do you read where, NIL won't be a factor for this recruit? And obviously, that's pretty hard to believe in most cases because we're led to believe that NIL is a major factor for all recruits in particular. But when you start speaking about individual names, sometimes it seems like for this recruit, he's not about NIL. He's about doing the right thing, which I think is kind of an unfair premise for the players to even have to, speak into. There's nothing, scandalous about NIL, but players, I think, are afraid to speak openly about it. So when a guy like Proctor says, hey, I came back to Alabama for less NIL than I've gotten in Iowa, maybe that's true, or maybe that's just what he feels like he needs to say. But, I do think that it is also perhaps a little bit of a mirror into what still matters in recruiting overall. That, money can close the gap a little bit, and maybe for a player like Proctor's caliber, maybe Iowa's willing to spend more than they sometimes typically do. But Alabama, even with Kalen DeBoer as coach, is still just a sexier program. It's a program that has playoff aspirations. It's certainly a lot more fun, just given the plodding nature of Iowa's offense, and maybe you still can get a little bit of a discount on that. We said to begin the show that, there seemingly a little bit more dispersion in terms of where, top players are going, but there is still a built-in advantage for the top programs, and perhaps that's what Alabama used to win with Kadyn Proctor right there. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And before we wrap up here today, let me also give a shout-out to our friends at Precision Garage Door. I love neighborly companies because, so many of the folks that watch or listen to our show, you're homeowners, you love your community, you love your neighborhood, and you want to sort of take good care of your home within that neighborhood. And sometimes for you, that might mean, doing something new with your garage door. Either it needs to be repaired or perhaps it needs to be replaced. But when it's time to think about something new for your garage door or just a new garage door overall, I want you to think about our friends at Precision Garage Door, because the same way we talk about five-star recruits all the time, with Precision Garage Door, you're talking about a five-star reputation for service established after a long list of five-star reviews. They've got so many of those, thousands over the course of the years they've collected, which is one of the reasons why you want to trust Precision Garage Door when you need some work done, whether it's repair work or replacement job, whatever else. A neighborly company like Precision Garage Door is going to be answering the phone 24/7, making sure you get in touch with that garage door replacement repair specialist whenever that need arrives for you. They are a neighborly company, so you can find them online, precisiondoorgeorgia.com. That's precisiondoorgeorgia.com. And don't forget, there's a $29 service fee that's waived anytime you get repair work done. That's the level of service they provide for you. They're going to waive that fee just because you got some repair work done. So find them online one more time. It's precisiondoorgeorgia.com. Hopefully, I have a reputation for a little bit of humility. I mean, everybody's sort of prone to ego at times, and I have to play defense against that in my own life there as well. But hopefully, I have a little bit of a reputation for being a humble dude. But also, when it's time to take a bow and pat yourself in the back, perhaps you need to do that there too. Our golden shoe today may be an example of that. One of our, sponsors, Dr. Pepper, celebrating a pretty significant milestone. Bubba shared this with me. He was not the only one who shared this, by the way. That Dr. Pepper has now surpassed another soda as the #2 soda brand in the U.S. I don't want to say this happened solely because of their sponsorship here on DawgNation Daily, but who knows? Maybe we are the sole reason that Dr. Pepper is climbing the ladder here when it comes to soda. They may be #2 in the world here, #2 in the U.S., but they'll always be #1 with me. So golden shoe for Dr. Pepper for surpassing Pepsi, and a golden shoe for Bubba for sharing that with us. That's really fun to be able to see. How about the lousy, stinking Gators? They are a #2 of a different sort, if you know what I'm saying. And it's been 1,307 days since they've beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. That is our Gator Hater Updater. And we'll see all of you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. All right, so today, I'm going to have to beg your pardon. We're going to have to be quick with the comments. And I'm sorry about that, but it's just one of those things. But maybe we'll have time to go do more tomorrow. So let us see. On Facebook, to kick things off here today. Yeah, so I'm not saying we take full credit for Dr. Pepper and the success they've enjoyed, but prospective sponsors, take note. Dr. Pepper's been with us for a year or so. All of a sudden now, they've knocked Pepsi down a peg. So we'll take some credit for that. Let's see what else. On Facebook, some of y'all, I gotta find something I can read in here. Johnny Prescott saying, I talked about Alabama being sexier than Iowa. I think he said I don't necessarily call him that. I think it's one thing to say, like, I didn't say just sort of sexy in general, just sexier than Iowa, which maybe would be a pretty good state motto. Hey, we're at least more interesting than Iowa is. Yeah, maybe that's the case. Lynn Shipman, by the way, a throwback to one of the jokes I remember. This is one of the first Georgia games I really remember. I don't remember the details of the game, but I remember the aftermath of the game when Georgia beat Texas in the '83 Cotton Bowl. Big deal. When Georgia played Texas in the 2018 Sugar Bowl, we brought John Lastinger onto the show just to sort of have some fun with the '83 Cotton Bowl, because that was one of the great childhood memories, like how happy my grandfather was about that. I just remember that so vividly. And that was the whole thing about what time is it in Texas, 10 to 9. So Lynn Shipman bringing that back, you'd love to see that. Matt Rukavina on the subject of the Lakers going after Danny Hurley. That's interesting. And I guess if you get paid big bucks, I guess you got to take it. But doesn't Hurley just seem like a college coach? This kind of reminds you of Kobe Bryant wanting Coach K for a brief moment to be the coach, and obviously that never materialized. And, maybe Danny Hurley does have NBA aspirations, maybe. But, does that really, it reminds me so much of Kobe going after Coach K, because it seems like that Kobe was the one that's really kind of leading the way there on that. But if you're Hurley, you've got this college thing figured out. It's like, do you really want to go be the 80th coach to get fired for coaching LeBron James? Because that seems to be what happens there, for sure. Let us see what else. Matt Rukavina, that's cool, Matt. That's awesome. He met the wife of Lawson Cooper from the Donnan era in Houston. Apparently they live here too. So there you go. Yeah, a lot of folks out there in that Houston area for sure. That's fun. Greg Baker says, when Lastinger ran that touchdown, I about lost my mind. Yeah, it's a fun highlight. It's just a fun thing. Lastinger was really a good player for Georgia. Maybe at times hasn't always gotten the credit he deserves. Kind of overshadowed a little bit because Buck Bellew obviously won the national championship prior to that. Kent Holcomb says, y'all be nice so BA can read your comments. Yeah, Kent, you tell him. Rhodey Williams says, make the black jerseys happen on Black Friday. I would very much be in favor of that, Rhodey. I would very much be in favor of that. We'll see if we can make that happen. I'm suspecting they probably won't because I don't know. But I've said before, I feel like the Georgia needs to just wear the black jerseys all season long. And at that point in time, when they do wear them, it's not such a big deal. I think that Kirby would wear them more if some of y'all wouldn't act crazy about him. And I'm not talking about Rhodey. I'm talking about other people. I think that Kirby doesn't like the response to the jerseys because of perhaps good reason. The Alabama thing in 2008 was not a good deal. That was not a good deal. So, it's like the old meme about this is when we can't have nice things. Like being down 38-7 at the half is when we can't have nice things. But yeah, I'd be in favor of that. Barry Watkins says Kirby's not going to do it. I suspect that's probably true. Let's see what else. I also can't read the DawgNation.com comments today either. Let's see what else. Let me go to YouTube. And listen, if you're going to our YouTube page as a way to find comments that are safe for air, then we have really diminished ourselves here. Let us see what else. Jonathan Aaron says, are you going to get near Bevo down at the Texas game, or are you going to try to meet Mattress Mac? I wouldn't mind meeting Mattress Mac. I think that he's kind of an inspiring business success. My issue with Bevo is this, and we said this before. The thing about the Texas game in 2018 is a total cheap shot. I felt like this before. I know that Bevo's got a huge size advantage over UGA, and Bevo is gigantic. It's like I remember being pretty close to Bevo there that day before Bevo's cheap shot on UGA. Like it's a little bit anxiety producing how big Bevo is, right? You sort of realize if this animal doesn't want to, there's not a person in the stadium that's going to make him. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like you really, like there's that moment where like, whoa, boy, this is a different kind of God's creation right here. Like this is a little bit different sort of beast than I'm used to. And then shortly after that, he obviously attacks UGA in, sort of just disgusting fashion. But if UGA hadn't been pinned in and UGA had sort of like free reign, I do think UGA could have gone for the neck because that's what the dogs do. I think that UGA could have used quickness and gone for the neck. But obviously, Bevo's cheap shot made that impossible. I'm not saying I want UGA to kill Bevo, but in a self-defense way, I think that if Bevo and UGA had met on sort of, like even turf, I think that exchange could have perhaps gone differently. But can you imagine if Bevo had killed UGA? And like, can you imagine what that like? And I mean, obviously, like everybody's like, "Hey, let's get the photo shoot together of the two mascots." I mean, can you imagine how bad that would be? Christy says Bevo would be a dead cow walking if he hurts UGA. Yeah, no doubt about that. You know how they always do like the steak and the beanie weenies for like the G-Day the following year. After G-Day, everybody's eating steak that day. Greg Hendrick says, on a scale of 1 to 10, how worried are you about Kentucky this year? I think it'll be a good game. I think it certainly could be a good game. I guess I would answer this question this way, and it's going to be not what you asked for on a 1 to 10 scale. But I definitely believe that Georgia is vulnerable to a loss eventually. I do believe that. I sort of believe it's more likely to be later than sooner. In other words, this is still a pretty fresh Georgia team that has not gone through a huge gauntlet when it goes to Lexington. So my guess is that the demands of a tough schedule haven't really kind of added up to very much at that point in time. If Kentucky was in a sort of a traditional spot for Georgia in November, I think the game is very different. I'm looking at like back half of the schedule for Georgia, and I'm looking – I'll tell you, I don't think the Georgia-Tennessee game is getting nearly enough attention right now. We talked about this, I believe it would have been, last week? Is that right? Yeah, last week. I'm a lot more concerned about back third games for Georgia than I am early season games. Kentucky on the basis of the team and what Brock Vandagriff could be, it's certainly a formidable challenger, no doubt about that. But if Georgia loses a game, I believe it's likely to be because at a certain point, the just challenge of a season kind of adds up to a certain toll for them. And I believe that's likely to be late in the season as opposed to early. Spencer Clark says, no way, BA. We're going to run that table. Go Dogs. But listen, I love that. I love that for sure. Let's see what else. Jonathan Aaron asked, we're going to ask Jeff tomorrow about getting baby Gronk. But didn't Gronk, he's already decommitted though, right? That was, am I right about this? That Gronk committed to Georgia, but then he decommitted shortly after that. Is that right? So perhaps it was a short-lived recruiting win. Y'all confirm that for me. Baby Gronk does commit to Georgia, but then he decommitted, right? Or is that not true? But it would be great if I just sort of just in a deadpan fashion. Jeff, big commit for Georgia from the class of, is it 2030, 2031, something like that, with baby Gronk. All right, let's go. Lance D says the Bama game will set the tone for the rest of the season, win big there, and everyone else is in trouble. I do think it could be an interesting kind of preview of what's to come. And, if Georgia goes in that spot on the road and wins somewhat convincingly, then that could be a pretty big statement. And it's also the win that you get that makes everything feel bigger. I would say that on paper, the Georgia-Texas game for me is bigger than the Georgia-Alabama game. But as Lance is pointing out, that's sort of only true if you beat Alabama. That, it's like a video game thing. Like you beat Alabama to unlock the other levels. Other games get bigger because of that. So Nature Gator says that baby Gronk, flipped from Georgia to Florida, but he's also already decommitted from Florida too. So there you go. There you go. So Rambo says that Bulldogs' noses are God designed so they can hang on to the neck and still breathe, the war of attrition. See, there you go. Hey, Rambo, always impressive with his knowledge. And absolutely, that's exactly what we sort of expect to be true. Randy also says, do I like the strawberry Dr. Pepper? The truth is, in most things in life, I'm sort of basic. Like the criticism you hear about people online, so-and-so's basic. Like, I'm basic. I am basic, you know what. I like regular diet Dr. Pepper. I drink seemingly one right after the other, or at least at times it feels that way. And so I think for a lot of people, they enjoy the various flavors and things like that, and I encourage those because I think it's fun to try new things. But I sort of am a creature of habit for the most part. And so I am, for the most part, drinking my diet Dr. Pepper, just sort of regular type deal. Randy also said that Bill Norton's projected to be the starter at nose guard for Texas this year. I didn't really know that. Let us see what else. Eric Ray says that Baby Gronk is on an epic decommit run. Yeah, I guess this whole thing with him lately, he's not even trying to be a player. Is this all just a joke? Because I know a couple of things that he did. He was with Livy Dunn and he was doing that interview and his dad was telling him what to say, and people were like, "Oh, this dad is so whatever, sports dad type thing." Well, come to find out, is the whole thing just an act? Is he even a football player? Let's see what else. Barry Watkins says, I'm not getting into that. Let us see what else. All right, we're going to get ready to go for today. We'll come back. We'll do more comments tomorrow. It'll be fun. Jeff Santel will be here. That'll be good stuff there, too. Glad to have all with us. Really, really, really good times with all the Georgia recruiting stuff taking place. We knew June would be fun. And it certainly turned out to be that way. So y'all find R.S. Andrews online. I was driving yesterday. I saw an R.S. Andrews truck. I was like, there you go. Good people doing good stuff. You love to see that. So find them online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They'll get your air conditioning unit tuned back up, get it running factory fresh specs. May only cost you $99. Somebody's told you may need a new unit. At some point in time, you probably will. But our friends at R.S. Andrews may be able to tell you how to get some new life out of that old unit, and that's what they're all about. So find them online, rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here, Dog Nation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We'll talk to you soon.